Gloom is the right word to describe the atmosphere of the forest, with its muddy river, bare trees that have long since shed their green robe, and two unfortunate deer drinking cold water to keep from dying. But some of the trees, like the houses that were once bustling with life, have died, leaving only memories. There was a pitiful handful of people left who were barely alive, but some still had a glimmer of hope that they could reach the neighboring city and perhaps be saved there. But the problem was that it was very difficult to get to. But among all these people, one man stood out. He had been lying in the same position for several days and did not react to anything, which caused concern in the others, because it was time to let go of everything that tormented the soul so much and begin the fight for life. The guy himself understood this perfectly well, because in his current state, it was unlikely that he could achieve justice and take revenge on his offenders. It was difficult to accept and realize that everything he had believed in for many years, all the friendly vows, smiles, and support, turned out to be an illusion, a lie. And now the bitter taste of betrayal flows through his veins, and the evil and satisfied smiles of the poisoners are frozen in his memory. Just yesterday he had everything, but today he has nothing more. And the only people next to him are old people, the poor, and the sick. Even the sun hid behind the clouds, and it started to snow, as if it decided to laugh at the main characters. Although it might not have been the guy's fault, the village of Klena as a whole was becoming stranger and stranger every day, with all sorts of devilry happening regularly. It would seem that it was time to get used to this. But the old man reached out his hand to one of the snowflakes, which sparkled unusually in the light. He shouldn't have done that, because it wasn't just snow, it was magical snow that turned everything living into ice sculptures as soon as it came into contact with it. Moreover, each snowflake was saturated with spiritual energy, so they posed a danger to all living things. Could the protagonist resist fate? He probably could, but now he just wanted to accept it and die peacefully. But someone had completely different plans and thoughts about this. So the fireball landed a few meters from the guy, entering into resonance with the snowflakes. The most interesting thing was that, along with the fireball, a man appeared in this godforsaken place. For some reason, Guan Lee believed that the main character was the cause of all the troubles and bloodshed that happened in the surrounding lands. And this, despite the fact that you can't look at him without tears. But here's the problem. Another group of people led by Gongyan Bai appeared out of nowhere, and these guys didn't even consider ordinary people as people. So one death more or one less didn't matter to them. At this point, the welcoming speeches ended and the real battle began. But there was no talk of a fair fight. Guan Lee was confronted by dozens of warriors of the ice element. However, his blazing sun absorbed hundreds of his opponent's ice needles. While the ordinary soldiers were frightened by this turn of events, Yang Bai had expected something similar. So he used frost breath and stopped the blazing sun. But this did not stop Guan Lee. He cut through the almost frozen sun, trying to strike the enemy. But something went wrong. Only excellent reflexes allowed him to dodge and repel the attack with a cold weapon. After all, Guan Lee had many enemies who wanted him dead. One of them was Mo Jinggu, who was even able to appreciate his opponent's skills, recognizing his strength and dexterity. But even though he knew he was outnumbered, Mr. Zhou rushed into the attack. It was naive to think that his enemies would stand and wait for him to maim or kill them, so they counterattacked, not allowing him to form a line. Guan Lee was surrounded. Only the gods could save and help him, but it was obvious that they were in no hurry to intervene in the current situation. Meanwhile, Mr. Gon's men continued to weave their techniques to capture or kill the man. And after just a few minutes, huge energy snakes began to emerge from them, which were intertwined with each other, resembling a cage or a net from which it is not so easy to escape. It all seemed strange, and Guan Li didn't understand why Yang Bai continued to use such useless techniques, considering the fact that the man had learned the 9 yin formations. There was no answer, which was not surprising. Meanwhile, Guan Li did not wait any longer and cut through the spiritual snake cage. But this did not impress Yang Bai, who believed that the truth was on his side, meaning the enemy was wrong. After which, he activated his formation, and all of Guan Li's efforts went to waste, as the dead snakes began to come back to life, and even grow back the parts they were missing. And this was already a problem, because no matter how many reptiles Guan Li killed, they came back to life, and there were more and more of them. And while he was dealing with some, others wrapped themselves around his legs and pulled him down. The man understood that he had chosen the wrong tactic, because if he continued in the same spirit, he would only increase the number of snakes and not beat them, and their bites were painful. And even if it was only painful, they poisoned his body and absorbed his spiritual energy. And while he was thinking about what to do next, Yang Bai added the second frost breath to the snakes, which quickly froze the enemy. From the side, Mr. Mo watched all of this, realizing that Mr. Zhou would not be able to withstand such a huge number of Yang Bai's secret techniques. Soon the man really did begin to resemble an ice and snow installation by an impressionist sculptor. But we must not forget that Guan Lee was not the type to surrender to fate. No, he was the type to surpass his limit and survive. So he used the secret technique, boiling blood, flaming soul. And in an instant, he escaped from the icy captivity. This was not what his enemies had planned. So Jingu attacked him with iron eagle feathers. Everything was in vain, but Guan Lee was not going to waste it on trifles any longer. So he destroyed the iron bird with one fire technique. But this was no longer enough for him. He could not control himself and was ready to blow everything up here. And if Yang Bai thought that he was the only one here who was strong and unique and could use the 9 yin formations, then he was deeply mistaken, because Guan Lee activated the 9 yin fire formation, the blazing flowers of the sultry city. Some of his opponents weren't very smart, considering this formation a weak spell that could easily be destroyed by squeezing it tighter in the hand. The man was naive and stupid, because in a moment, the flower turned the living man into a white skeleton. Unlike his men, Yan Bai understood the danger of this formation very well, so he ordered his assistants to immediately create a water zone. No matter how hard they tried, they lacked strength and speed, and Mr. Mo had to intervene again. Because he, too, began to realize that he was facing a strong opponent who could wipe everything off the face of the earth, including him. So, by releasing and directing his birds into the flowers, he hoped to gain an advantage in battle. Meanwhile, the main character lay below, phlegmatically watching everything that was happening a couple of meters away from him, wondering who these people were and why they were preventing him from dying peacefully. And Guan Lee had already formed a new fire attack and launched it at his enemies, while he looked like a real fire god. The fire engulfed everyone who stood in the young man's path, leaving not even a pile of ashes behind them. Yan Bai was the only one who had managed to hold back the fire and not let it get to him. But even she had a hard time doing that. The problem was obvious. Mr. Gong realized that his opponent had entered the form of Zhou Ran, and this form was the most dangerous weapon. And the man's fire became many times stronger, even melting the iron of Mr. Mo, who relied on it so much. But if they thought that this was the ultimate point of their failed plan, they were mistaken, seeing giant footprints on the ground that were filling with lava. And these traces were left by Guan Lee, who hardly resembled a human being. And besides, he was curious whether Yang Bai and Jingu were immortals, since they dared to talk about genius and great lineage in front of him. The conspirators remained silent and watched their opponent approach, although Mr. Gong believed that his third frost breath would be able to withstand Mr. Zhao's fire form. But something was clearly wrong, because nothing happened when the technology was activated. More precisely, as if nothing had happened, the man began to choke, and there was no longer any talk of a third breath, so Mr. Mo suggested that he run away. Meanwhile, Guan Lee paid no attention to his opponents. He understood that his dynasty had been disgraced, and no river stream could wash away this disgrace. Realizing his guilt and involvement in this nightmare, the man shed a single, stingy tear, which immediately evaporated. And the man decided that only he himself could kill himself, because only Zhou Ran would destroy his soul, burning it to ashes. And then he finally offered to cut off his own head. But he had no intention of running away and stood in place, behaving like a real psycho. But he didn't expect that there would be anyone who would take advantage of this tempting offer. So it came as a surprise to everyone when Mr. Guan Lee's head flew off. But the initial shock passed quickly, and Yan Bai recognized the new character as Li Yiya, who had beheaded their enemy. They even plucked up the courage and tried to express their strong dissatisfaction to the young man. But one look from him was enough to make them change their minds abruptly. Moreover, it seemed to them that in another minute, Li Yi would kill them with just one glance. So they took Mr. Zhou's head and ran away. The man remained in the burnt-out clearing and looked at the headless body of Guan Lee. At that moment, his artifact screamed, and the person on the other end assured his interlocutor that he had fulfilled his part of the deal and now owed no one anything anymore. Li He didn't respond to this and continued to stand there and look at Guang Li's body in the form of Zhou Ran. And then he got tired of doing this, and the best solution seemed to him to blow it up and leave no trace. The battle was over, and peace came to the sinful earth. Even the sun came out from behind the clouds. And in the midst of all this peace and quiet, strange things began to happen to the main character. From somewhere, he found the strength to fight for his life. And this despite the fact that just a couple of minutes ago, he wanted to quietly pass away to another world. And now, he even assumed a sitting position. And in his head, the thought clearly sounded like an alarm that it was too early for him to die, that he wanted to live no matter what. The guy understood perfectly well that his chances weren't that great, but he wouldn't forgive himself if he didn't try. So even though it was hard for him, he took it step by step, hoping for a favorable outcome. However, his legs failed him at the most inopportune moment, and the young man fell head over heels. The landing was also not pleasant, face down on the ground, painful, embarrassing, and humiliating. But this didn't really matter because the guy understood that after the battle of such outstanding personalities, something useful had to remain on Earth, something that would save his life. But so far, he had found only pieces of flesh, ashes from burnt bodies, and charred metal. It was a shame to admit that there was little, or rather no, use in all of this, when suddenly, among other junk, he found a beautiful bottle. And in the bottle was a real spiritual treasure. In this small object, the boy immediately recognized something that he once possessed, and that, due to a combination of circumstances, he lost. And now fate had given him a second chance, which he was not going to miss. He swallowed the meridian-opening pill, and the process of restoring spiritual energy began. It's not that the main character particularly enjoyed this process. It was still quite painful, but nevertheless, he didn't have a better solution to the problem. This went on for some time. Even the sun began to go to sleep, and the young man looked much better. The pill completely restored the young man's vitality. Fate had smiled on him after all, and given him a generous gift. After this, the guy decided to bury with honors the people thanks to whom he would be able to see the dawn. Although he did not know them, he was grateful to them. And everything was going according to plan, when suddenly, a golden glow rose up from the grave, settling on the guy's hand. But this was an unusual glow. It somehow transported the young man into outer space. The most interesting thing is that he was not alone here, and a silhouette of a man appeared in the distance. Only the stranger did not react in any way to the appearance of the protagonist, who tried to start a conversation with him in order to understand where he was and what to do next. Suddenly, a voice said that the guy didn't have enough spiritual energy. And then a sign appeared with different techniques and their different levels. Someone or something suggested that the guy try using the 9th rank of the sword and the 1st rank of the Daoist. And then something even more amazing happened. The silhouette began to pull the guy into itself. And when the guy became one with the silhouette, he heard a greeting. But he was not the unique master of the sacred land of Dongzhenghu. It turned out that Jiang Wang had found himself in the illusory world of Taihu, which was no different from reality, except that no one could physically harm the boy's body. He could also study and perfect various techniques through sparring and increasing his cultivation level, as well as earn merit points in direct clashes with other cultivators. There were 72 sacred lands in total of the 36 lands. Each produced 10 points more than the previous one, and the last one produced 100 points more. His land was in 23rd place, and besides, the main quest was supposed to start in 30 days. Having received all the necessary information, the guy returned to his own time, realizing that what had happened to him could hardly be called something normal. So it would take time to accept and comprehend everything. But all this would come later. Right now, he needed to return to the academy before the elections of the inner circle and take revenge on his former friends for all the humiliation and betrayal. No sooner said than done. A few days later, Jiang Wang returned to Maple Village. One could even say that the academy welcomed him with open arms. At least some of its members did. But the guy paid no attention to the greetings and shouts, and in general behaved extremely defiantly. And if this confused the younger students and they were afraid to approach the guy, then Du did not suffer from this. He hugged his friend tightly because he was sincerely glad of his return, and even though everyone around said that he died, the second brother never believed it. But the first named brother, Lin He, although he smiled and looked good-natured, there was a coldness in his words. So it was not difficult to guess that he was not happy about the return of the third named brother. Zhao Ruchen, the fifth sworn brother, was also not happy to see him, and did not hesitate to ridicule the main character's dirty and torn clothes, calling him almost a beggar. Surprisingly, Jiang Wang didn't pay any attention to all of this, and didn't even react to the fact that Hu was about to drag him into the tavern and get him drunk. He simply stared straight ahead without blinking. The other brothers became curious about what had attracted the attention of their adopted brother so much. The fourth sworn brother, Fang Peng Jiu, approached them and believed that the protagonist should have warned everyone before setting out on his journey, as they were so worried about him. Such concern could deceive many, but not Jiang Wang, who for all 57 days thought about the fourth brother, imagining their meeting. But he was not moved by this, believing that the protagonist was confusing something. He was so worried that he even sent his people to look for him. And these conversations probably would have led to a fight. But Hu wanted to drink, and in general, he was offended that the main character thought only about the fourth brother and forgot about him. The situation had become tense, so Lin He decided to act as a peacemaker, saying that the brothers would always support, listen, and provide Jiang Wang with any assistance, whether it was a simple dispute or a high-level legal proceeding, as long as he calmed down and thought clearly. The protagonist understood perfectly well the reason for his older brother's worries, because he himself was hurt and disgusted by the fact that one of them had neglected the oaths for personal gain. The accusations came easily from the young man's lips, but the problem was that without evidence, they were just empty words that shouldn't be thrown around. But Jiang Wang had one irrefutable piece of evidence, which he demonstrated to everyone. And if anyone wanted to see emptiness, they were deeply mistaken. The main character dragged his accomplice, Peng Jiu, for his brothers to see. It was this servant from the house of Peng Jiu who conveyed the message to the protagonist that his brother wanted to meet him and celebrate his victory over one of the gangs. And it was then that he was poisoned with the wine served at the table. It was a bomb, and Mr. Fan understood that if his servant opened his mouth, he would be in great trouble. So he personally decided to kill him, saying that he was not worthy of life since he tried to harm his brother. The servant was dead. There was nothing more to fear, thought the fourth brother, asking the protagonist not to pay attention to this, because someone simply wanted to quarrel between them, nothing more. But no matter how hard the fourth brother tried to hide his crime, he was unsuccessful, because his servant had already laid out the details of their crime on paper. And now, knowing the whole truth, Jiang Wang was not going to back down. His anger at his brother was so strong that only death could calm it. Now, Peng Jiu was scared. He even decided to hand the sword into his friend's hands so that he could kill him with it, hoping that his gesture would soften the heart of the protagonist. The performance bore fruit, and although Jiang Wang did not soften, the other brothers believed him and took his side. The elders watched everything that was happening from the sidelines, and they could not intervene, and they did not have the strength or nerves to watch all this. And then, Jiang Wang, ignoring the roar of the crowd, took out his sword to kill the traitor. No one expected that he would dare to do something like this, so they could only watch with wide eyes. One precise blow was enough for the protagonist to knock the sword out of his opponent's hands, causing him to fall face down on the ground. Jiang Wang's behavior puzzled his sworn brothers. They couldn't believe that he could do this to their fourth sworn brother. But they had to understand that it wasn't the guy's nature to cross the line, and if he did it, it was for good reasons. Meanwhile, Peng Jiu tried with all his might to press on pity, appealing to the young man's conscience and to their long-standing friendship. But his words only made the protagonist even more angry, because the only thing he wanted was revenge. And it would be better for his opponent to shut his dirty mouth, because all his words dishonor the concept of friendship, loyalty, and camaraderie. Moreover, it was funny to watch how the fourth sworn brother dodged the main character's attack, because just a minute ago he had promised him his life, but dodged it. Besides, if he had died that day, the story would have ended there. But since he was alive, Peng Jiu must pay for the insult with his own life. The fourth brother was not going to put up with this state of affairs, because in his opinion, his interlocutor was not a victim at all. And in fact, it was he who gave Wang Jiang the opportunity to act nobly, which he missed. And in general, it was only because of his stubbornness that the young man found himself in the situation in which he found himself, and the fourth did not consider himself obligated or indebted to his opponent, showing his unsightly true face. It was obvious that there was no point in further arguments, and since the fourth Nivan brother did not admit his guilt, the protagonist had no choice but to resort to the last resort. Jiang Wang approached the great master, claiming to be his follower, and saying that the fourth sworn brother, Peng Jiu, had practically killed him. And therefore, the anger he was now feeling could not be washed away, so he must take revenge. Therefore, in the current situation, the only way out was a duel to the death. Justice was the only way to resolve this situation. And since Peng Jiu was still part of the clan, he had no choice but to refuse the appointed duel. The young man himself understood that he had backed himself into a corner from which there was no escape. But he was not going to give up without a fight. And then, something truly incomprehensible began to happen. It was as if nature had gone crazy and was whirling yellow leaves in a waltz around the young people. This all happened for a reason, and nature helped and accompanied the emergence of a new character who always loved spectacular appearances. He was the head of the clan, and only he had the right to decide whether the great duel of justice would take place, and by what rules, between the members of his clan. After a short thought, Daoist decided that the great duel was the only way for the boys to resolve all their differences, and to ensure that everything happened fairly, he activated the Jade Cage. And in just a moment, the terrifying roots of the giant trees, intertwining with each other, cut off all outsiders from their rivals. And now the boys stood opposite each other, drilling each other with their eyes, realizing that they had nowhere to run. And all the students of the academy were watching them closely, as was the head himself. By and large, Peng Jiu hadn't planned on such a duel, or the clan leader's permission. He knew he most likely wouldn't be able to win this fight, and certain death awaited him. Even if, by some miracle, he were to win, the Academy's leader would certainly launch an investigation, and then he would have to go through all the circles of hell again, since it was unlikely anyone would leave him alive after what he had done. That's why he decided that it would be best to escape now, while there was even a ghost of a chance of salvation. The guy failed to take one thing into account. Daoist didn't just activate the Jade Cage on a whim, but all in order to prevent the escape of one of the participants in the duel, as was eloquently indicated by the branch with a sharpened tip rapidly heading towards one of the duelists. Another second, another millimeter, and the boy would have lost an eye, because the branch stopped a few millimeters away from his pupil, warning him that he wouldn't be able to escape. It was obvious that Peng Jiu now had no choice but to either lose his sight or try to defeat the protagonist, both of which looked unpromising. Meanwhile, the clan leader gave the signal, ordering the boys to draw their blades and begin the duel. Because a rule is a rule, and a duel is a duel. Only one of them will survive, proving his case even if he was initially wrong. After which, with the help of his miracle root, he lifted Peng Jiu's sword from the ground and threw it to him. Be that as it may, the young man was also well-trained, so he easily caught the sword thrown to him and squeezed it in his hand. The sparring was about to begin, and the Academy's students even began placing bets on which of the young men would win, as one of them was number 1 and the other number 2 in the overall Academy power rankings, making it difficult to predict the outcome of the duel. Yohu wanted to intervene in the confrontation between the two young people, but the first-named brother stopped him, pointing out that since the head of the clan had intervened in the situation, they were powerless. Meanwhile, Jiang Wang had no intention of attacking his opponent first. He was waiting for the moment when he would either attack him or be ready to repel his attack, because he was distinguished by his nobility and never attacked from behind. Peng Jiu was already ready to start the duel, but he could not understand why his so-called brother could not sit quietly after returning, and brought the situation to the point of absurdity. After all, by and large, the young man simply wanted to become stronger and did not see anything bad or reprehensible in his actions. Therefore, he decided, without a twinge of conscience, that he had to finish what he had started, and he was the first to attack the main character. But he was not one to be timid, and had sufficient skills to repel an attack from above and remain unharmed. Moreover, the words of the fourth named brother aroused indignation and anger in him, although they seemed absurd, but they made it clear to the third brother that he was right in his decision, and the fourth must die. But this fight would not be so easy. Besides, Peng Jiu had already moved away from the defeat zone and noticed that his opponent's confident face always irritated him, and he always wanted to hit him to erase that expression once and for all. The young man then summoned all his strength, demonstrating the success he had achieved in a short time. It became obvious that he had opened the meridians, which meant that he had stolen the pill from the third brother, which he had earned through honest labor. Now Peng Jiu felt superior, because although his swordsmanship was lower than his opponent's, he had eaten the meridian-opening pill, and now Jiang Wang could do nothing to him. But he was very wrong, because the main character, in order to get this pill, broke into the lair of Western bandits, went through many bloody battles, and in the end destroyed their nest. He was wounded 13 times, 2 of them fatally. He barely made it home, and now he is ready to take revenge. And this open meridian pill was obtained by him with tears, sweat, and blood. So the main character was curious whether it brought happiness to the fourth named brother. But it was not this fiery speech that impressed Peng Jiu, but the fact that Jiang Wang opened the meridians, because this could not have happened, because he stole the pill, because he ate it, so his brother could not have achieved such a result. At this point, the conversation ended, and the young men crossed their blades. Peng Jiu couldn't understand how Jiang Wang had become so strong, how he had been able to open his meridians, how he could push him back in battle. Moreover, the main character was able to wound him, so the guy decided to calm down first, because for 57 days he meditated and almost completely dissolved the pill in his body, and his opponent was seriously wounded and would not last long. So he must overcome pain and fear and kill the third named brother. But no matter how hard he tried, the main character managed to block or fight off his attack. Don A closely observed everything that was happening around him and drew his own conclusions. The fifth and second sworn brothers were also closely watching the duelists, and Ru Chen also noticed that there was something wrong with Jiang Wang's meridians. Nevertheless, both young men have held their own so far. But at some point, Jiang Wang switched from defense to attack, believing that an attack from above could turn the tide of the battle. However, Peng Jiu believed that this would be to his advantage, since the stimulation of the enemy's meridians could not last forever, which meant that he would deal him a fatal blow in the next few minutes. The right moment arrived quite quickly, and Peng Jiu decided to deliver a finishing blow to his opponent. The young man's sword pierced the side of the third named brother. At this moment, the traitor did not yet understand that he had lost, believing that victory was in his pocket, and all because of the main character's haste. And he was not far from the truth, since the young man really did want him to die quickly, so he immediately counterattacked. The main character's blow was so skillful that it was not immediately noticeable, and it hit the opponent's right hand, in which he held a sword. After that, he would hardly be able to do it because he would not be able to regrow the limb. All he could do was scream in pain and surprise, and watch as his hand and sword fell to the ground. But Jiang Wang wasn't going to stop there, so he jumped up to his opponent and hit him in the chest with his elbow. The silence that hung all around was broken by the sound of cracking bones, Peng Jiu's ribs crumbling like seeds, and the guy's legs couldn't support him anymore, so the force of the main character's blow sent him flying. Only the jade cage had other plans. The roots grabbed the boy by the legs to return him to the dueling circle. Meanwhile, Jiang Wang pulled out his former friend's sword from his side, saying that for all 57 days he had dreamed of this moment, imagining in the smallest detail how justice would be carried out with his own hands. Only now did Peng Jiu realize that the protagonist knew about his weakness, and that he would take advantage of it, which is why he led him into a trap, and he had no intention of stopping. So the boy looked in horror at Jiang Wang, who attacked him again. Now all he could do was ask the third brother to stop and have mercy on him. But the protagonist didn't listen to him. So the traitor turned to the head of the clan in tears, asking him to save his life. Because he was, after all, the heir to the Fawn family, one of the pillars of Maple Village. True, Dane had no intention of interfering in the fight, because this was not a simple sparring match until first blood, but a duel to the death, and only one must survive. In this way, the old man relieved himself of responsibility and freed the third brother's hands. Death, in the person of Jiang Wang, came very close to the traitor. He felt its breath on his skin, so he tried one last time to bargain for his life, to explain everything to his friend. The protagonist even became curious to hear another fairy tale lie, but Peng Jiu was telling the truth. He simply wanted to live up to his father's expectations. However, no matter how hard he tried, no matter how much effort he put forth, he couldn't compare to Jiang Wang's genius, who even received the meridian-opening pill. So he had no choice but to resort to extreme measures. And in general, from the time he stole the pill, he couldn't sleep normally, his conscience tormented him, and the main character remained alive and returned home, so he can be forgiven for his mistake. It was funny to think that such a fiery speech would soften the protagonist's heart. Therefore, it came as no surprise to anyone that the young man pierced the body of his former friend with his sword. For all the pain, for all the despair that Jiang Wang had experienced in that village, he could not forgive his fourth sworn brother, but he hoped that he would rest in peace. So the fight ended, and the protagonist realized that his meridians had become more flexible than before the fight began. Moreover, once in the subspace, he saw the worm of his true spirit hovering around him. Now the young man realized that it was this very worm that had been stimulating his meridians all along during the battle, helping him achieve victory. But the protagonist was interrupted from his thoughts by the voice of the clan leader, who asked him to follow him immediately, as they had something to talk about. No matter how much the protagonist wanted to be alone with his thoughts now, to comprehend what had happened, he could not disobey a direct order from his superior. When the man and Jiang Wang were alone, the leader pointed out that before the duel, the boy had failed to provide clear evidence of his innocence, despite the fact that the servant's testimony, although present, was difficult to accept as the only reliable evidence of Peng Jiu's guilt. In this case, the best solution, in the opinion of the clan leader, would be to wait for the court's decision and a detailed investigation. But his student acted rather recklessly, challenging his ill-wisher to a duel to the death and killing him. But the protagonist had a different opinion. He understood perfectly well that in 2 days, the elections for the inner circle were to take place. And considering that Peng Jiu had opened all the meridians, he would definitely be chosen. Thus, he would become untouchable. So Jiang Wang took the risk and did not regret it. Dong Ah partly understood his student, but he needed an explanation for the fact that Jiang Wang had actually managed to open the meridians, despite the fact that his recent opponent had stolen the meridian-opening pill from the guy. So the question arose as to how he had been able to achieve the result. The young man did not hide the truth and told that while he was practically unconscious, he witnessed an epic battle, after which he found a meridian-opening pill on a corpse named Guan Lee. To confirm his words, he can lead the head of the clan to the graves that he left in that wretched place. And most likely the authorities were already aware of that battle. This was a surprise confession for Don A, however. Now many things fell into place, and one could say that it brought relief and shed light on what had happened. The man had no doubts about the veracity of the protagonist's words, so he calmly allowed him to leave his residence. As soon as the young man left the house, his fifth adopted brother ran up to him. The protagonist was a little taken aback when he saw him there, not understanding where everyone else was, and why Ru Chen had come to him. It turned out that the first sworn brother told Ru Chen to take care of the body, but the second sworn brother had disappeared somewhere. The protagonist understood perfectly well that Yehu had most likely cowered in a corner and was getting drunk. Such behavior was normal for him, and quite understandable after everything that had happened. Sadness washed over the young man, so Ru Chen decided to take matters into his own hands, saying that the scoundrels who handed over their brothers deserved to die, and the elder brothers would soon understand such a simple but bitter truth. So Jiang Wang should not grieve, and must definitely go with him, have a good meal and drink. But the young man didn't want to eat, drink, or communicate. The only thing that would do him any good right now was a bath and sleep, and everything else didn't matter. Although this answer did not satisfy the fifth named brother, and even offended him a little, the guy did not insist on anything, and left his third named brother in proud solitude with his sad thoughts. As soon as he entered the house, memories of that wonderful time came flooding back, when he and his sworn brothers were one, laughing, having fun, talking about some trivial things but were happy. Now everyone had tasted betrayal, pain, and misunderstanding. It was painful to realize that those days were forever in the past, that their friendship was in the past. that their mutual understanding was in the past, that they had changed and nothing could be brought back. At that moment, Jiang Wang remembered a situation from his childhood, which also became a turning point in his fate, when he met an immortal who offered to go with him as a very young boy. The most interesting thing is that there a part of his spirit separated from his body and was ready to go with the immortal anywhere and do anything. It was so tempting for a small child. Seeing how the spirit was drawn to the spirit of man, he asked to go with them and train, because they were true brothers. But the problem was that the immortal spirit was only willing to take one student and teach him everything he knew. At that moment, the child's spirit made its choice. It pushed the living boy off the cliff, wanting to become the only disciple of the immortal spirit. The child kept falling and falling into the void, not understanding why such a monstrous, unjust act had happened to him. It was foolish to hope that someone could survive a fall from such a height, but the child was lucky. His fall was softened by the water, but there were some nuances here. He began to drown. Soon the boy turned into a young man who continued to drown, choking on river water, gasping for air, and unable to fill his lungs. Then the immortal spirit spoke, asking the protagonist to remember that the heart of the man who threw him off the cliff was not as good as his swordsmanship, but his heart was much harder. And the path of a cultivator was an eternal battle, including with oneself. Hearing these words, Jiang Wang woke up and sat up abruptly in bed with a silent scream, realizing that it was only a dream, but even in this dream there was a grain of truth that he needed to realize and accept. The most interesting thing was that this dream tormented the young man for more than one day, forcing him to wake up in a cold sweat each time. But even so, the young man realized that he had been able to sleep for quite a long time. But the strange thing was that the first and second brothers were still not home. But at that moment, he saw his younger brother in the yard and asked him if he had seen his older brothers, to which the young man replied that he had not seen anyone anywhere. Only then, something strange began to happen to him. The young man began to shake his head from side to side like some kind of toy, repeating and repeating that he did not see anyone. And so it continued, until the moment when his head came off and fell to the ground. But if anyone thought that this was the end, they were deeply mistaken, because the younger brother's body continued to move chaotically, even after losing its head. But even that wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing was that this same head, which had recently fallen to the ground, came to life and began to hunt the main character. Only now did the young man realize that the clan had been attacked by monsters, and he needed to run, find his older brothers, and tell them about this incident in order to save everyone else. Things were complicated by the fact that the uninvited guests had set up an intricate barrier that blocked off the space, so no matter how much he wanted to, he wouldn't be able to hide in the room. Either he would kill the monster, or it would kill him. Jiang Wang didn't want to die, so he decided to use his open meridians. He succeeded in doing this, and that was the first step. His second step was activating the Tsujiu shot technique, which hit the target straight on. The situation began to become more complicated as the main character received his first injury, and it became much more difficult and painful for him to move. Meanwhile, the monster wanted to chat a little, pointing out the fact that the main character had very strong legs. And in general, it was quite curious to watch how the guy used the meridians that he had recently discovered. After which, he screwed the head back onto the body, saying that the cultivator's flesh tasted divine, especially when he opened his meridians, so he was eager to get the main dish for himself. Meanwhile, he began to realize that this monster was capable of controlling corpses, and that he would not have enough strength, and that he would hardly be able to defeat it. Therefore, there was only one way out: to run and report this monster to the brothers from the inner circle, otherwise many could suffer. But the problem didn't go away, the barrier didn't evaporate, and the guy flew into it at full speed, hitting his whole body painfully. Thoughts were born in his head, and not a single one was clear, as well as a plan for further action. But a truly miraculous thing happened. Somehow, he managed to destroy the barrier and escape to freedom. The guy was falling from a height, but he was lucky enough to quickly group himself so as not to break his limbs when he fell to the ground. Jiang Wang was, by and large, a lucky man, as he landed quite successfully and immediately ran into one of his comrades. Li Chang, too, was pleasantly surprised that the boy was able to use his energy to break through the dome. Now he would deal with the monster personally. and the main character could go to the infirmary and heal his wounds. At that moment, Don A approached them and also decided to take part in the battle in order to minimize the damage. However, Jiang Wang was in no hurry to leave. He considered it his duty to inform the master that the monster was capable of controlling corpses, and also that one of the younger disciples had been killed. This was very tragic and unpleasant news, which saddened the master. But this is life, and nothing can be fixed. But Dong-A could suck out the poison from the protagonist's leg using the poison absorption technique. It was quite a painful process, but the result exceeded all expectations. Jiang Wang realized that there was no longer any cadaveric poison in his body. He was completely healthy. Meanwhile, the monsters tried to escape in an unknown direction while the cultivators were busy with each other. On the one hand, this was a fairly objective phenomenon, but Don A was not going to forgive the monster for his lawlessness, because he killed one of his favorite students and therefore had to pay for it. And in order to prevent the monsters from escaping, the clan leader activated the Jade Cage. The tree roots crawled towards the monster with lightning speed, intending to trap it in their strong embrace. In the end, the monster hadn't expected Dong-A to intervene, so now he didn't know what to do. The only correct decision was to split up in order to increase the chance of survival. The head and body began to act separately. The monster understood that they had no chance against Dong-A, so the best option was to escape. Meanwhile, the monster's main body was trapped in a jade cage and pierced by hundreds of sharp thorns. Meanwhile, the head tried to run away, because in any case, they got what they wanted. But it was necessary to inform the lady that in this ordinary Daoist, a man appeared who opened the meridians under rather interesting circumstances. But the monster was unable to escape, as the jade cage turned into a jade fist and hit its head. It was unpleasant for the monster to realize that Don-A's control reached so far and deprived the monster of any chance to escape. Nevertheless, he tried to escape from the battlefield, but again he failed, as the tree's roots turned into a predatory, unpleasant flower that decided to feast on the monster. But while the monster was still alive, Don-A decided to begin the interrogation. He needed to know who had sent this monster to their clan, and why on earth the monster thought it had the right to wreak havoc on his territory. People really needed answers, which the monster was in no hurry to give him, and demanded that the person come as close to him as possible, and only then would he speak. It was in vain that he started this game, because Don-A had no intention of negotiating with the blackmailers. If he doesn't want to answer, then he doesn't have to. And if the flower wants to eat, then let him eat. The monster signed his own death warrant, because he dared to tarnish the dignity of the clan's territory. Having finished with the monster, the clan leader decided to go to the city leader to report what had happened. Changzu was supposed to deal with the situation within the clan itself and ensure that everyone was safe and no one else was hurt. Watching the clan leader retreat, the protagonist thought about how he, too, wanted to reach the level of a clan leader in the future and become a 5th-rank warrior. But he still didn't know whether this would be realistic. At that moment, the third-named brother approached him, appearing like a jack-in-the-box, and frightened him. Ru Chen was in a foul mood, because he had spent the whole day in the incense tower. But Mrs. Miao Yu still hadn't shown up. The guy didn't understand why this happened, because he had grown up to be a handsome man and also had money, but the girl didn't pay any attention to him. It was sad and miserable. But the main character was curious about where the first and second brothers had disappeared to, and the 5th one guessed where they might be. So he led the eldest through the crowd of younger brothers who were discussing the recent incident. Ru Chang heard that the Fan family refused to take back the body of their heir, but the first brother couldn't just throw him into a mass grave. So now, he and the first brother are somewhere on the bank of the Green Willow. Everything happened as the 5th-named brother had expected. The first and second were near the willow tree where they had buried the 4th-named brother and were now saying goodbye to him. Once again, Ru Chen could be proud of himself, because his guess turned out to be true. Yi Hu and Lin He immediately noticed someone else's presence near the grave, so they turned around at the sound. And they didn't look their best, as they had been shedding tears for their fallen comrade for a long time. Lin He understood perfectly well that the only thing that does not change in this world is that the world is always changing. Because before, all the brothers trained here, they learned to wield a sword here. Who would have thought that the day would come when one of them would be buried here? No one could have imagined that the 4th sworn brother would be capable of committing treason, that he would be so consumed by the selfish desire to achieve success at any cost that he would end up in the damp earth before the others. Lin He found it hard to believe, because Peng Jiu had once helped him when he needed it most, so he had to bury his former sworn brother with honors, even though he might not have deserved them. Jiang Wang understood her elder brother's feelings very well, and besides, they were no longer children. He understood that Lin He had the right to keep warm feelings for the traitor in his heart, but he had no right to condemn the protagonist for passionately wanting to forget this person. As bitter as it is to admit, the protagonist was right. Everyone has the right to have different feelings towards Peng Jiu without judging others. But we also need to understand that a lot will change in the future, and changes may be frightening, but they are inevitable and cannot be brushed aside. Meanwhile, Ru Chan started to pester his second adopted brother, who was crying like a girl, so he couldn't help but tease him. Yes, he did it, because Yehu began to teach the boy life through cuffs, since the younger one does not understand that teasing his elders is not allowed and is fraught with danger. Meanwhile, the first-named brother was thinking about the fact that changes were inevitable anyway, and each of them had to enter this current and swim with it. Because if you swim against the current, you could get too many bumps and bruises. But if a person has pure thoughts and heart, then he can easily cope with any changes in life and meet them with dignity. Meanwhile, a beautiful girl appeared in the abandoned temple, whose appearance was completely out of place in such a dirty and squalid place. It was clear that she had come to this god-forsaken place alone. But suddenly, a skeleton in a cloak and on legs appeared next to her, who was not happy with the chosen meeting place. The white bone metal Daoist saint thought otherwise. For her, this place was the purest and most beautiful, because it was here that the great Guan Lee died, and here she could still feel his delicious aura. The skeleton decided to get straight to the point. He believed that Dong A would be a force to be reckoned with, and that the man could cause them a lot of trouble. So it was necessary to start kidnapping cultivators for sacrifice right now. But the skeleton didn't understand that Don A was beyond his capabilities, and he needed to think things through carefully. And if he wanted to die so badly, then she would be happy to help him with this. It wouldn't be difficult for her to cut off his head, for example. But since the assistant does not want to die, then they all need to lie low for a while and wait until the Dao child appears, and only then begin to act. The sacrifices could also be postponed for now, as the elders had come up with a new plan, and the saint had come here precisely to discuss its details. But before this, the girl told her accomplice that he had missed one of the victims who was in this temple, and she had met her in the village of Klena. The skeleton didn't listen to her, nor did he delve into the details of the new plan, but simply decided to proudly leave, reminding her that it was not a fact that their deity would recognize the woman when he arrived in this world, so she shouldn't get arrogant. He left, and the saint was left alone, not understanding and not imagining a situation in which their deity would not recognize and love her because she had kept herself for him. A new day dawned, and at the Maple Village Academy, all the students came to the elderly professor's classes and listened to his intelligent speeches. Song Shifang said that each of the students in his class had just entered the inner circle, and until their meridians were fully opened, they could only practice breathing techniques. But the real path of cultivation would begin after the meridians opened. After which, he asked the students to talk about the ranks of cultivators. One of the students answered his teacher's question without any problem. The answer was correct. Everyone needs to remember that the 9th rank is only the beginning of each cultivator's path, where the initial spiral of the Tao will be formed. But for this to happen, one must have a good understanding of the basic matrix scheme. In the future, when everyone has accumulated enough energy and will be able to distribute it evenly across the 81 points of the Guan matrix, this will mean that the spiral has formed. The teacher said important things, but not all the students listened to him. But the old man did not make any comments to anyone and continued to talk about how an ordinary person only has access to 2 Tao per day during the opening of the meridians. But even his patience was not eternal. So when Yihu and Ru Chen allowed themselves to go too far, he still pacified them. In order to finish my story in a calm environment, it turned out that each person would need at least 41 days to form the matrix. This is how they will begin their long journey, because in order to rise to a higher rank, they will need to create at least 3 Tao spirals. Then they will be able to feel the heavenly chakra and open it. It all sounded interesting, but Jiang Wang still couldn't figure out how long it would take to rise in the ranking system, and even tried to calculate it. but he clearly had problems with mathematics. It was painful for his older adopted brother to watch his efforts. So he said that everything should take about a year, but everything depends only on the talent and character of the person who is learning. And then a logical question arose. Would the protagonist be able to achieve brilliant results on the path of cultivation? Would he be able to surpass Dong-A and those warriors he had met not long ago? Meanwhile, the lesson was coming to an end, and the teacher delighted everyone with new homework to reinforce the material covered today. They had to repeat a series of techniques, which were also divided into classes. And there were a huge number of them. Here it is necessary to understand that there are special high-class techniques, and the lucky owners of them can single-handedly destroy a small country. And if there was at least one such warrior in their country, then they would be reckoned with and respected. But the teacher did not reveal the details of such techniques and dismissed the students from the lesson, hoping that one day they would become the pride of their country. So the lesson was indeed over, and the students began to leave the room where they had gathered before, when suddenly someone stopped the main character. Fan He-lin, a member of one of the 3 major families in Maple Village, the son of the clan leader, came to make changes for his deceased brother. He also reported that all the clan members made a unanimous decision and excluded Peng Jiu from the family tree since their family never supported dishonor. But Jiang Wang didn't even listen to him, since the whole situation and his former friend were in the past for him. So he no longer needed empty changes. However, the young man had not yet finished his long speech and tried to stop the protagonist. The guy said that his father had acquired a meridian-opening pill and given it to him. So his meridians were now open, and the guy believed that he was now on par with the protagonist. And together they were now different from the local rabble. So he believed that they should get closer and become best friends. The only problem was that Jiang Wang was not inspired by such speeches. He was not at all interested in this proposal. Besides, he already had friends and did not need new ones. This behavior undoubtedly offended He-lin, and he was filled with anger, and said that the protagonist would regret his words. Meanwhile, evening had come, and all the boys from the 1st to the 5th named brothers gathered together in the steam room. So the 2nd and 3rd brothers were practicing breathing techniques, and it would have been better for the protagonist not to shirk either, but today he was supposed to take part in the promised quest in the world of Taifu. So he was in anticipation. So instead of practicing breathing techniques, he decided to move to that world and take a quick look at what the quest was all about. A second later, he was transported to the mysterious world of Taihu, where he was greeted by the game master, after which the voice began the countdown to the start of the quest, showing a huge clock. The seconds slowly floated away, leaving no hope that all this would soon end. Nevertheless, the young man was already ready to enter into battle, no matter with whom, although he was very curious about who would be his first opponent. Jiang Wang understood that in the past 30 days, he had completely mastered the meridian-opening pill and accumulated several Dao essences, which gave him a certain advantage. So he hoped that he could hold out for at least 2 rounds. But the report was finished, and the opponent for the main character never appeared. Thus, it could be concluded that this sacred land still remained with the main character, and no one had laid claim to it or challenged his ownership rights. Moreover, the sacred land of Dongsenhu remained at the 23rd level, and 1,800 dignity points were added, and now the guy had a total of 3,700 points, which now needed to be spent wisely. But he didn't have time to do this yet. Noticing that the Daoist simulation platform began to behave strangely, the platform began to transform, and a voice in the guy's head insistently told him that he needed to put his hands on the table that had appeared. The simulation was supposed to begin when the guy would recite the text of the desired technique to himself. So the first thing he decided to name was the Guan matrix, which cost 1,850. After this, the process of launching the simulation began, which was disassembled and rebuilt to suit the main character according to his personal characteristics. Thus, in such a short time, the guy studied the Guan matrix, although he himself did not really believe in it. He also had 1,850 experience points left. He could save them for later, but there was no telling what would happen to him tomorrow, so the best solution would be to level up all the techniques today, as much as possible. So he chose defensive fencing to learn next, since he did have a talent for it. He was curious about what could be hidden in this manual, bought from a street shop. But as soon as he began studying, the emotions and sensations from this process went off the charts. The knowledge and skills he acquired were so magnificent and enormous. Jiang Wan's time in the Taihu world came to an end, and he was transported to his normal world, where he sparred with his fifth sworn brother, and the young man was perplexed as to how it was possible that he could lose 20 times in a row when he usually wins at least 3 times out of 10. Jiang Wang stated that he had stumbled upon an interesting technique completely by accident. It consisted of 10 training forms and 5 attack forms, although he had only learned half of them so far, and his sword skills were far from what they had been before. But this technique didn't have a name, so he turned to Ru Chen with a request. Because his adopted brother had a good literary talent, so the guy could come up with an interesting name for this technique. The young man jumped at the idea and suggested calling this technique the Almighty Divine Sword. It sounded very ridiculous and frivolous, so the main character hit his fifth adopted brother and asked him to put more effort into coming up with a name. After thinking for a while, I came to the conclusion that the name Purple Chi of the East would be ideal for a technique that had 9 training forms and 5 combat forms. And this idea appealed to the main character, so he was happy for the first time in a long time. But not only the main character was happy, but also his fifth adopted brother, who hung around his neck like a monkey. And all because he also wanted to learn this extraordinary technique and asked his brother to teach him, but he still steadfastly resisted. But their friendly squabble was interrupted by Uncle Dan and Mr. Lee, as they had urgent business with the main character. It turned out that Lee's older brother had to look for the main character in order to deliver the message, but the guy himself did not yet fully understand why Master Don needed him. Mr. Lee asked the young man not to worry about having to personally deliver a message from the clan leader, since he was not from a noble family, so such assignments were not a burden for him. But he believed that Dong Ah most likely called the guy to talk to him because of the recent attack. Soon, they were already at the gate of the clan head's house. And what was most surprising was that not only Jiang Wang was called in for a conversation, there were several other people who were waiting for an audience. It turned out that the person summoned to the audience was a 5th-year inner circle disciple, Zhang Li Huang. But unlike his friend, this young man understood perfectly well that they still had to wait outside the door, since Master Dong Ah was still meditating. But a moment later, the doors creaked open, and the students bowed their heads in greeting to their master. Don A started the conversation by saying that everyone knew about the recent attack and murder of an Outer Circle follower, although an investigation had been launched, but it had not yet borne any fruit. Besides, they can't yet afford to have outsiders handle their affairs, so now this will be handled by the guys who will receive 8th rank awards in the future. Dong A also noticed that Jiang Wang and He Lin's meridians had only recently opened, so they should be more careful. Lin Huang and Qiang Qi will take one of the guys under their wing, as the proposed tasks must be completed in pairs. 90% of the reward will go to those who cope best with the task. At this point, the audience was over, and Don A allowed his students to pair up and begin their assignments. He had nothing more to say, so the boys could leave. Meanwhile, Li Wan said that his friends from the investigation department told him that 3 days before the incident, people were injured in one of the taverns. But it was necessary to look around there because some traces could be left. And an entire family was also brutally murdered, and some traces were found at the crime scene. So he was curious to hear the opinion of his younger brothers after hearing the information. Some did not answer this question, but Fan said that he would like to unite with his elder brother Lee, since the Fan and Jan families have long and strong ties. But the main character, along with his brother Lee, believed that the eldest brother should decide how they would be paired up. Since this was the case, Li Huang made a decision, saying that he would work with Jiang Wang, and they soon set off for Tangshan. It was evening, and the protagonist and his older brother arrived at Tangshan village, which looked scary and unfriendly. Although there were people here, they didn't look happy. No one paid any attention to the young men who had arrived. Everyone was lost in their own thoughts and experiences. Jiang Wan knew that this village lived by hunting, so people gathered twice a month, but today was not that day. So the streets were so empty. Soon the young men arrived at the local headman's office, but each of them understood that they would work very well together, as both were quite outstanding students and were well prepared for the task, since they could not let the other down. At the entrance to the building, the young people were met by the local constable, Tan Dan, who was waiting for their appearance as if it were manna from heaven, because they needed help. The man did not understand why the inhabitants of this village were so unlucky and suffered such a cruel punishment, because all the inhabitants were honest and hardworking people who did not deserve such a thing. But in order to understand the problem, Li Huang asked the constable to open the house where the murder took place, in order to look around and draw his own conclusions. The situation in the house was already terrible. Corpses were lying around, from which came a real stench, making the eyes water. The constable did not enter the premises, but asked the young people to be extremely careful, as the place was teeming with evil. Everything in the room remained the same as it was at the time of the death of the people. Even the food had not yet completely disappeared. What was also strange was that the food had not become moldy, but the body had managed to turn into a skeleton, which suggested that a demon or some other monster was involved in this crime. However, Jiang Wang and Li Huang decided to split up to conduct a more thorough inspection of the area, and then agreed to share the information they had gathered. The first thing the main character did was go into the children's room, and the first thing that caught his eye was the drawings and cognac, which would not have attracted his attention at any other time. Near the wall, he found the skeleton of a little girl surrounded by various toys. By and large, the guy came to the conclusion that the father of the family was working in the yard, the mother was cooking, and the daughter was playing in the room, which meant that the demon destroyed a very ordinary family. The problem was also that the unknown creature had prepared an unpleasant surprise for the people who entered the room. At some point, the girl's skeleton came to life and attacked the young man, clearly with the help of some necromancer or monster. However, the main character didn't think long and kicked the skeleton that had attacked him. The blow was so strong that the skeleton was imprinted on the opposite wall, almost breaking through it with itself. At the same time, the main character did not experience a drop of doubt or worry, because he understood that this was no longer a little girl who died. This was the result of the activity of very dark forces. Meanwhile, the skeleton began to tease the young man, saying that just a few minutes ago he had been crying over the fate of the girl, and now he had personally destroyed the only thing that was left of her. But such tricks had no effect on Jiang Wang. His heart remained unshakable, as did his belief that he was doing the right thing. Unfortunately, this place was separated from the outside world of magic. Otherwise, the older brother could have rushed here, but under the circumstances, the young man was left alone with his enemy. However, the protagonist also understood something else. The demon, if he could deal with him, would not play with his conscience. So he resorts to such dirty methods as intimidation, so that even if the guy cannot get out of this room, he will be able to find and kill the evil that has settled here. And the first thing he did to carry out his plan was to activate the purple chi of the East, namely, the first form of speed deception. After this attack, he realized that his sword could still wound the enemy who was carefully hiding here. Apparently, someone had used the C-rank Daoist technique, the yin and yang imitation section, and that someone was a demon. But what the next monster didn't expect was that some guy would be able to wound him with a simple sword. It was obvious that this boy hadn't even formed a Dao spiral yet, but his level of swordsmanship had already reached a high level, so he couldn't be underestimated. And it was a good idea, because Jiang Wang felt someone's gaze on him, and decided to attack the place where he thought the enemy should be. And if the monster had not noticed the movement of the sword, it could have died. But everything happened differently, and the demon escaped, destroying its own technique, so Li Huang was able to enter the room, unaware of what had just happened here. So the protagonist had to quickly tell his older brother about what had just happened and ask if he had seen any trace of demonic energy that could help them find the escaped monster. But as soon as the main character left the room and went into another, the guy saw the charred bones of local residents. Li Huang explained that 2 corpses had come to life, but he had quickly dealt with them, realizing that his younger brother had been given a demon cultivator, with whom he had successfully fought. Still, Jiang Wang felt hurt that he was unable to deal a fatal blow to his opponent, which is why he was able to escape. But what the main character did was enough. It was clear from the blood that remained on the sword, and it was from this drop of demon blood that the head of their clan knew a special technique that would help track a demon by his blood. Overall, their trip was more than productive, so they could return home with peace of mind. However, Li Huang noticed that this whole situation had deeply affected his younger brother. He was not far from the truth, because Jiang Wang has a half-sister on his father's side, and the guy is not very close to her. But when her father died a few years ago, The girl and her mother, who married another man, moved to another city, and the main character has not seen them since then. So when he saw the girl's corpse, he could not help but think about his little sister. So this thought made him lose his clarity of mind for a moment, believing that all this could have happened to her. It was a rather sad story, but Li Huang did not comment on it, while Jiang Wang handed the bag of gold to the constable and asked him to bury the family with dignity, as was customary. The young people left the village. They traveled along a road that was guarded by formations that cost quite a lot of money. Yes, it was a huge investment, but it could only protect against wild animals and weakening monsters. But anything stronger, and especially ferocious monsters, would have to be dealt with by other travelers on their own. It turned out that the ferocious monsters are animals infected with evil spirits, or puppets of demons who have lost their minds. In this case, their skin and bones deteriorate and become unusable, so no pills can be made from them, even if someone wants to. Despite their uselessness or shortcomings, encountering them will only bring trouble. For this reason, they are also called disaster beasts, from which it is better to stay away. But the lecture ended there, and Li Huang had a few questions for the main character. He was curious why demons were always circling around the guy, what his secret was, and if he himself didn't know the answer, then with the help of force he could find out absolutely everything. So a second later, the young woman shot a spiritual arrow at her younger brother. But in the end, he didn't hit the young man, but the arrow that someone shot at the guy, thus saving his life. While the protagonist looked puzzled, Li Huang was prepared for this turn of events and was going to deal with the attackers once and for all. Suddenly, Jiang Wang heard the familiar voice of the monster that had inhabited the girl's skeleton. So he didn't intend to stand still either. Moving forward at full speed, Jiang Wang clearly understood that his opponent was afraid of him. So he ran away and hid. But he also saw perfectly well that the main character was trying to provoke him, and he was afraid not of the young man, but of his older brother, who really was a big problem for him. But the main character didn't listen to him because he believed that he had the right to sentence the monster to death for killing innocent people. So he activated the second form of his technique, deception of accuracy. Yes, Jiang Wang's swordsmanship was quite advanced, but in the end, he was just a boy who had not fully mastered the technique and had not fully realized his potential. So Demon decided that enough of these empty games was enough. It was time to show how big the difference in strength was between them. So, without thinking twice, he activated his exploding corpse technique, which really looked massive and terrifying. But he was unlucky. The main character's reaction was more than good, so he was able to easily dodge the first blow. But the boy immediately realized that his opponent's arm had not only lengthened, but had also become stronger than stone, since the sword could no longer damage it. This meant that the enemy had many more unpleasant trump cards up his sleeve, which made the main character's task more difficult. Jiang Wang himself has to rely only on the purple chi of the East, as well as on 20 accumulated Dao essences. And while the main character was thinking about how to avoid death and emerge victorious in this difficult situation, the demon attacked him again. But the protagonist wouldn't be the protagonist if he didn't stop his opponent. He understood perfectly well that he wouldn't be able to escape. All he could do was use all his trump cards at once to catch the demon off guard. So he activated the purple chi of the East, his third form of insight deception, and cut open his opponent's arm. The demon, of course, did not expect such a turn of events, so he looked extremely puzzled. Therefore, the only thing he could do now was to increase the distance between them to avoid close combat. By doing this, he activated the corpse's poisonous fog. It was easy to hide and attack from behind in this fog. So it will now be difficult for the main character, but the opposite will happen for his enemy. Only the demon miscalculated, as Jiang Wang used the protective aura of his sword to avoid the harmful effects of the poisonous fog. This was the second unpleasant surprise that raised questions in the monster. The protagonist activated the purple chi of the East again, but this time in the fourth form of deception concentration, only for the purpose of demonstrating the power of the sword that had been tempered for decades, and to unleash this power on the dark creature, delivering justice. Now, the fourth form of the purple chi of the East has transformed into deception of intent, the fifth form. This transformation finally broke the pattern that had been forming and developing in the demon's brain for years. He couldn't understand where the novice cultivator got such enormous potential from. But he no longer had time to search for an answer to this question, as the sword of justice pierced his sinful body. Moreover, he cut it into two equal parts, fulfilling the sentence of his master. But the problem remained even after the demon was killed. The blade that had faithfully served the protagonist for many years broke. Moreover, the guy's body couldn't withstand such a hellish load, so he started coughing up blood. Jiang Wang understood that his body could not yet withstand the strain of using 5 forms of his miracle technique at once, and now it would not hurt him to rest a little and recuperate. But he didn't have time for this, since the monster that was supposed to die looked alive, although it might have seemed that way to him. But the protagonist had nothing to worry about, as Li Huang had intervened in this matter, and now the demon's corpse was resting in his hands. The guy didn't understand that a boy who hadn't even formed a single Dao spiral was able to deal with an 8th-rank demon. True, he hoped to capture the creature alive in order to drink more information, but in the end, they have what they have. A corpse is a corpse. And besides, his older brother tried to revive him, but it was no use. Jiang Wang understood that the monster was afraid of his elder brother, so he began to fuss, and this gave the protagonist a slight advantage, which he used to kill, since his own life was at stake, so he did not think about catching the enemy, but killing him. Li Huang did not blame his younger brother for what happened. On the contrary, he admired his skills, but he was a little sad that he would not be able to learn anything from the corpse, since the souls he called did not respond to his call. Moreover, a curse was placed on the demons that erased their essence upon capture or death. So now they have no memory left, and dragging them into the clan is simply pointless. Right now, Jiang Wang's wounds needed to be taken care of. But the boy was sure that the mission couldn't be postponed, and that he needed to return to the clan as soon as possible and report everything that had happened, while his wounds could wait. It might have been the right decision, but Li Huang believed that the security formations had been breached, so it was necessary to report it to the authorities and not delay. Meanwhile, in one of the cities it was already night, and in the House of Pleasure, people were having fun as best they could in the company of beautiful ladies. It was disgusting to watch how the deputy head of the investigation pavilion, Hudong, behaved and tried to seduce Miao Yu, or rather, what he was hugging instead of a fragile girl's body. A man watched all this from the side, asking his mistress what they should do with the cultivators from Tangshan. The beauty looked at the night city and was silent, thinking about her decision. She thought that it was better to find out more about the main character since he killed their follower with fencing, so it was interesting to find out what technique he used and who taught him this technique. Only Donsik was not aware of this, so he knew that this technique had never been studied before by anyone in the Maple Village clan. It was something completely new and unknown. This satisfied the girl for now, so she allowed her humble servant to disappear into an unknown direction and not be an eyesore any longer. But even after he left, she still couldn't stop thinking about the technology that no one had ever studied anywhere. Because if something like that had come to the boy, then there was only one way he could have acquired such knowledge. Meanwhile, in the village of Clyona, Don A was interrogating a man who had been brought to him by his students. The only problem was that this man's mind was struck by a curse. He had no memory left, which meant they didn't learn anything new. Changku came to the logical conclusion that their enemy was not so simple, and that powerful people were behind him, which meant that the matter was much more serious than they initially thought. However, such conclusions did not make any impression on the head of the clan. He was interested in what Huan had found out. The guy said that after meeting the demon cultivators, Jiang Wang came to the conclusion that their minds were subject to mental curses, so there was no point in leaving them alive, so he killed 2 of them, and the protagonist dealt with the last one. Dong A was very impressed with this result, because he had essentially only recently opened his meridians, but had already achieved high results in the fight against evil. But the young man was very modest, so he thanked the teacher, acknowledging the fact that he was not yet good enough for this, but he had room to grow. The result of the investigation completely satisfied the clan leader, so he informed his disciples that their mission was completed and that each of them would receive 5 Dao merits and sent them home to rest. And the guys left the residence of their leader, and each one was going to do his own thing. For example, the main character decided to first visit the Pavilion of Dao Merit. Once inside, he activated the Dao Merit list and marveled at its scale, realizing that a great deal of resources had been invested in creating such a miracle. It is surprising that the elder brother Li was 17th on this list, and brother Zhang was 3rd. He had accumulated 700 merits. How much did he have to do to become so popular and in demand? But the most interesting and impressive was Zhu Weiwo, a world-famous follower of their clan, who took on missions of no lower than the 7th rank, and it was rumored that he could even rival the heads of other clans of their dynasty. Meanwhile, the protagonist asked the merit list to help him find the sword with the least amount of merit required to release it. A few minutes later, a standard magic sword appeared in front of him, which was forged by masters from the kingdom of Chang and made of pure, but to saturate the sword with Dao energy and maintain the technique, it was necessary to spend 300 Dao merits. Yes, it was quite an interesting decision. Since this sword can store techniques, does this mean that with it the main character's capabilities will be significantly expanded? But he did not have 300 merits, so for now he will just have to admire this sword. At this moment, a third-year student, Wang Changxiang, came around the corner and startled Jiang Wang. The young people got to know each other and apologized for scaring each other, although this was not part of the plans of either one. But their meeting in such a place was obviously destined by fate. Overall, this meeting was surprising, and the protagonist understood that this young man belonged to the family of the village chiefs of Cleona. And he was also ranked 7th in the list of merits. At that moment, the 5th adopted brother ran up to the protagonist, carrying in his hand an urgent letter from his house. The gist of the letter was that his Aunt Song was having trouble with her inheritance and her herbal shop. So she was worried that the protagonist's younger sister might get into trouble, and asked him to take care of her younger sister for a while she dealt with the problems that had arisen, after which she promised to take the girl back home. The most interesting thing is that Jiang Wang remembered his little sister as a very little girl, so he didn't quite understand how he would take care of her now given his lifestyle. Nevertheless, he brought his sister to his place and introduced her to his adopted brothers, who promised to help him look after the baby. Of course, Anand wasn't against living with her little brother, but she was worried about whether her mother really didn't need her anymore since she was sent here. Jiang Wang began to explain to the girl that her mother loved her very much, but she had a lot of things to do right now, so she asked her older brother to take care of the baby while she did these things. While this situation was out of the ordinary, all the brothers decided to join forces and entertain the girl in every possible way. For example, Yehu became her racehorse, and Ru Chen took on all the expenses. But the adopted brother soon deeply regretted that he had decided to take all the expenses for the walk upon himself, since the girl and the other adopted brothers had bought too much different food for which he had to pay. But no matter how much fun they had, the girl still wanted to go home to her mother. And, of course, she really wanted to live with her brother, to have fun with him, but she really wanted to go home. She really wanted to go back to her mother because she thought that she had done something wrong since her mother brought her here. So the girl cried bitterly, breaking his heart. Therefore, the main character himself wanted to cry, but he held back, saying that Aunt Song would soon sort out all the affairs and would come to them and take her home. So he hugged his little sister tightly, promising that he would always be there and take care of her, no matter how difficult and scary it was for both of them. The protagonist's first adopted brother could not resist hugging the third adopted brother and the girl, promising that he would also be there for them, so that they would not have to cry. The other brothers also could not stand it and tightly hugged the people dear to their hearts, giving the warmth of their embrace. But at some point, the girl got tired of such tight hugs, and it even seemed that she would soon die, since the boys were squeezing her too tightly in their embrace, so she threw them in different directions to breathe freely. The next day, classes at the academy continued, and the old man spoke with enthusiasm about the importance of planning, because if you don't do it, then a person will have problems in the future. Moreover, the path of a cultivator will always be difficult, but for some, it is a starry sky, while others will always look at the dust under their feet and will never be able to become anything more than an ordinary toad. Moreover, every student today must once and for all remember the names of the largest and most significant cultivator families in this world. The Jin family controls the central region, located at the very center of their continent, popularly known as the Thousand Demon Gate. The eastern region is ruled by the Qi family, and their territory is washed by the sea. The south is under the control of the Zhu family, popularly known as the Fallen Dead Forest. The Qin clan is responsible for the affairs of the western region. The Mu and Jin clans occupy equal parts of the northern region, and their combined forces fight back against the Demon clan. But these are only the large clans. There were even more small ones, and in order to survive, they needed to create alliances based on common interests. Then they could coexist quite well with the larger clans, enjoying a certain autonomy. Jiang Wang and his friends didn't really listen to the teacher. The guys asked the main character if he really thought it was normal for Anan to sit at home alone while he was at the academy. But the guy believed that this was an excellent way out of the situation. By and large, Jiang Wang liked the fact that his older brothers treated his sister so well and showed care and concern. And everything was fine. Right up until the moment when the alarm sounded and all the students were asked to immediately gather in one room. Something truly terrible happened, as a soldier came into the classroom and said that he would borrow the room and the people in it for a good cause for a while. The man took his seat, and the students talked among themselves. Some recognized the man in front of them, while others had no idea who he was or why he was behaving so arrogantly and impudently. It was Wei Yang, the general, and he hoped that his assistant Zhao Lang had informed everyone of the upcoming conversation. The general's assistant didn't even bat an eyelid and began to brief the students on the situation. It all boiled down to the fact that problems had arisen in the city of Shaolin, and the students of the academy's inner circle would be mobilized to clarify all the circumstances. The students did not understand what they had to do with it, since other bodies were supposed to deal with such matters. And this could have been the case at another time, but everyone was busy with other matters. Someone was dealing with the aftermath of the demonic beast's attack, and the main department had a secret mission, but the general was personally ready to assemble a group at the academy to ensure success. Jiang Wang and his brothers listened attentively to this speech. Ru Chen did not want to participate in this, but Ye Hu and Lin He did not want to miss this opportunity because they needed to open the meridians. Since that was the case, the second-named brother put them at the forefront of the volunteer list, which upset Ru Chen since he didn't need all of this. There weren't many people willing, which didn't make Wei Yang happy, but he signed up these 4 and hoped that there would be another 26 willing participants. After some time, Qiang Zhu came into the hall. As a third-year student, he also wanted to take part in this raid. This served as an example for another third-year student, Chang Zhang, who also decided to join the others. Now the general's mood has improved, as 2 recognized talents have joined the mission, and one can already think that everything will go smoothly. A little more time passed, and the list was completely filled. And Wei Yan left the academy with a calm soul, hoping that none of them would lose their fighting spirit. And so the group arrived at the scene. The general demanded to be informed of the situation. It turned out that the fog over the city of Shaolin had not gone away, and the 2 brothers went there in the morning to reconnoiter. But they still had not returned, and there was no news from them either. This was clear, but what the general could not tolerate was that his men were getting out of hand and were cutting down trees instead of following his direct orders. His officer became tense and began making excuses, saying that it was necessary for his brother's family, which was left without a breadwinner. But the man understood that he had done wrong and was ready for any punishment. The punishment followed immediately. The logs were confiscated, and then an investigation into the crime would have to be carried out. The rest must follow the general forward. Jiang Wang and his friends watched this scene, and for him, it was all too cruel. But his older brothers had a different opinion, because this was not the academy, but the army, and the rules here were different. So it was difficult to judge what was right and what was wrong. The time for talking ended, and after some time, the entire group arrived in the city of Shaolin. But right at the gates, another problem arose. The horses began to rear up and refuse to go any further. It was strange, and no one could understand the reasons for such behavior of animals. Chang Shang suggested that it was the fog, something very bad in it which triggered the horses' instincts, frightening them to such an extent that they did not obey their riders. If so, the general solved the problem in a radical way, by cutting off his horse's head. After all, before a battle, there is nothing worse and more useless than fear and cowardice. And while Jiang Wang and Ru Chen looked at this in mute surprise, Ye Hu completely agreed with the commander. This was the right thing to do. Therefore, the second-named brother killed his horse without hesitation, saying that his blood was boiling in his veins, and he understood perfectly well that people whose hearts were full of fear had no place in the army. But he was more confident than ever. After a while, everyone was standing on their own 2 feet and preparing to accept the battle, since at the entrance to the city, a formation of archers could be activated. Since everyone was mentally and physically prepared, it was time to enter the city, and Mr. Wei would proudly lead them through this test. Having taken the first steps into the fog, the general ordered the troops to be sent further. Meanwhile, His assistant used the third-rank Dao art on his subordinates to help them at least a little. Jiang Wang was the first to notice and appreciate the changes, as his sword had become much stronger than it had been before. But Mr. Zhao didn't stop there and added an offensive flame that could be used by beginners in combat. And while most newcomers will now use swords enhanced by other people's techniques, the second brother himself became an enhanced weapon, as he used his fists in battle, and now the flames enveloped him like a protective suit. After all the preparations, the group went forward. Mr. Wei warned that they should walk in formation, not be distracted by trifles, and report to him about any changes in the situation around. It was not difficult to see that this hike would be difficult, as the fog was so thick that nothing could be seen beyond 3 steps. But at some point, the guys began to notice a huge number of silhouettes around, concluding that they were local residents. This fact greatly alarmed Mr. Wei, so he decided to attack the fog to increase his visibility, and at the same time ordered the newcomers to stand still and wait for a direct order. The picture that began to unfold was terrifying. In front of me stood undead people turned into zombies, and they did not react to anything. Now the students began to understand that they had gotten themselves into a difficult task that was not worth the promised rewards. It was clear that there wasn't a single living soul left in the city, and what to do with the zombies and ghosts remained an open question. At first, the general decided to go into deep defense. So Mr. Zhao created a protective circle of fire around them, and he set up protection in time as the ghosts began to attack them, and the fire forced them to retreat. That was good news. The bad news was that some ghosts had gotten into the circle and were going wild, so everyone had to take care of themselves. Jiang Wang didn't need to be told twice. He immediately began killing the ghosts that appeared in his path and showed aggression. This was the right decision, which the general appreciated. In general, he believed that everyone here was great and had come quite far, so not believing in the strength of the newcomers would be a real insult to them. Words like these were like balm to the heart of the second brother, who was beating ghosts left and right with his fists. Meanwhile, Mr. Wei moved a little ahead of the main group and waited until several ghosts hung on him. He didn't react to them at all, thinking that even if they killed all the ghosts, the fog wouldn't go away. And searching for something by touch without knowing where to go wasn't an option, as it wouldn't achieve a positive result. But then he threw all the ghosts aside and suggested that the guys work together. If one of them was good at the art of air, they could try to dispel the fog. Chang Zhang volunteered to help him in this difficult task, and in just a few seconds, the guy created a huge wind dragon. The beast flew forward, dispelling the fog, at least for a while. This effect was not achieved by chance, because the guy did not use a simple wind, but a special one from the 8 winds, and it was this one that made everything clear and distinct, ideal for their situation. Observing this, the general's assistant realized that the newcomer was very strong, because not even all 6th-rank cultivators could boast such control over technology. So he made a decision for himself, to become even stronger in order to be a support for Mr. Wei. Changsheng worked like this for a while, but soon he needed a short break. But even now, the picture in front of the cultivators has become clearer and more understandable. Ghosts appeared from underground, and there were a huge number of them. It was strange that there were more ghosts than all the inhabitants of the city as a whole. So the question arose as to why they all flocked to this city from all the surrounding areas. In general, the situation was much worse than they expected. So it was necessary to inform others what was happening here. Even the dragon's breath couldn't kill all the ghosts and clear their path, and it was better to leave the city army to deal with this, but the general couldn't and didn't want to wait. He needed to solve the problem here and now. The man understood that the army now had to deal with the neighbors who had attacked them, and he also saw that the ghosts of this city and the neighbors' attack were connected. So he needed to solve the problem himself, and not wait for reinforcements that might not come. Moreover, if you give in, it is unknown which city will be the next target of the demons and their other enemies. So you need to make every effort and defeat the enemy, trusting in the heavens and the luck that they send to brave warriors. However, he understood that not everyone was ready to fight to the death with the enemy. So Mr. Wei gave the boys a choice: go into battle with him or leave. Most of the guys followed the commanders, killing ghosts left and right, and after some time, they got to the source of all the troubles of this city. At that moment, the protagonist wondered why this huge barrier that blocked their path felt like a spell that the demon had recently cast on the room, from which the guy couldn't leave. But he couldn't finish his thought because the general tried to break the barrier. Only he didn't succeed, and the man was ready to listen to suggestions on how they could break the barrier and move on. One of the guys decided to try an unconventional method, causing a wave of misunderstanding among everyone who saw his actions. To some extent, it might work, since the guy possessed strong yang energy. But the method he chose to destroy the barrier was too embarrassing and shameful. But that didn't work, so the newbie asked his virgin colleagues for help because together, they are strong. But no one wanted to admit to something like that, and Ru Chen suggested that the guy use blood to improve the effect. Meanwhile, the general was not at all happy with the atmosphere among his subordinates. So he ordered everyone to pull themselves together and come up with another way to solve the problem. Changshang then informed his commander that while he was clearing away the fog, he noticed that the souls of the people were used to create this formation. This was not an ordinary action, and in front of them was the 9 Castles formation. In the grand scheme of things, breaking such a formation isn't all that difficult, since if you break 8 locks, the main 9th one breaks on its own. But the main problem was that the caster wasn't just using fog to secure the effect. The ghosts who formed the basis of the formation came into play, and they were very strong, even too strong. So the commander announced that he would take the main castle, the rest of the guys should split into 7 groups and take 1 castle each. Quite quickly, the newcomers divided the castles among themselves and were ready to begin the main course. Jiang Wang and his friends were the first to reach Shun Castle, but they had been running in circles for quite some time and could not find the source of the evil energy. Suddenly, ahead, among the thick fog, a silhouette loomed in red reflections. The boys stopped, realizing that this was what they were looking for, an evil ghost that needed to be killed. Just as they were gathering their thoughts, the monster attacked the protagonist. But the guy had already dealt with such individuals, so he easily repelled the attack. A plan of action immediately formed in his head. Since Ru Chen had already learned the first 3 basic forms of the purple chi of the East, he would go on the attack with the main character, and the second and first named brothers would cover their rear. The boys joined forces and attacked the monster. Activating the first form of the East Purple Chi technique, Jiang Wang dealt the first blow to the enemy. But this didn't have much effect. The enemy was standing on his feet and didn't have a single scratch on him. And while the main character had the enemy's full attention, Ru Chen attacked him from behind. The guy managed to wound the enemy, but he quickly pulled himself together and counterattacked Ru Chen. The enraged monster looked terrifying, and the 5th named brother had nothing to oppose him with. What was worse was that the guy didn't even have a sword to block the attack anymore. At this moment, the protagonist appeared from the fog behind Ru Chen, taking an attacking stance. And in just a moment, he pounced on his opponent using the 3rd form of the Purple Chi of the East. Only this attempt failed miserably. Moreover, the main character's sword was slightly charred, but the monster didn't care. He was even able to increase the distance between himself and the man. Meanwhile, the older brothers were dealing with the ghosts, but seeing that the youngest was left without a weapon, they lent him their sword. Now the guys could attack their opponent from different sides at the same time. This time, Ru Chen even managed to draw some blood from the monster. But the problem was that the sword got stuck in the monster again, and the guy had to put in a lot of effort to pull it out and continue the fight. At that very moment, the guy noticed something strange. The enemy's flesh began to bubble and behave in an incredible way. Staring at this, Ru Chen saw out of the corner of his eye at the last second that the monster was extending its clawed paw towards him to strike. The situation was worse than you could imagine. The monster struck the 5th named brother and grabbed Jiang Wang. Ru Chen landed on the ground, hitting himself hard, and the monster was already approaching him, wanting to finish him off. But no blow came, as the youngest was covered by Yehu, who was able to hold back the monster with his bare hands. The 2nd brother understood that he still hadn't been able to open his meridians, and he had no talent for fencing. But when it came to energy and blood, he had everything he needed to fight. So one left punch was enough for him to send his enemy flying over the cuckoo's nest. No one could deny that Yehu had done a good job, and Jiang Wang was proud of him, as well as the fact that it would now be much easier to finish off the monster. By and large, the 2nd brother himself looked like a monster at that moment. But the younger brothers shouldn't have worried about him. It would have been better to step aside and not interfere with adult problems. But even after the last attack, the monster did not look dead, unfortunately. Moreover, he became angry and was going to attack people with all his demonic power. But for this, he needed more strength. So he pulled several ghosts out from underground and cut off their heads to feed on their energy, after which he sent the heads of the unfortunate ghosts into his mouth. Looking at this, the guys understood that in a few minutes, their enemy would become much stronger than he was before. But they had no choice, and they had to overcome their fear and come up with a new plan to take the monster's life. And this had to be done quickly, since the enemy had not only become stronger, but had also grown a dozen eyes. However, this didn't really frighten Yehu, who jumped on the monster, after which a hail of blows fell on the skeleton's head, which was left to cover with its hands. Meanwhile, Jiang Wang combined the first and second forms of the East Purple Qi and struck his enemy's arm. But this only enraged the monster, who hit the guys with all his strength, throwing them away from himself. In the heat of battle, Jiang Wang did not immediately realize that his opponent was trying to grab him personally, and that is why he stretched out his bony paw towards him. But he was lucky, and Yehu managed to grab the monster by the paw and prevent it from harming the main character. Because the man held his opponent's paw tightly, Jiang Wang was able to cut it into pieces. It would seem that he should have been happy, but the main character suddenly noticed that the monster was reaching out its second paw towards his older brother. This time, it was Jiang Wang's turn to save his friend, even though he knew his strength was not enough to defeat this creature alone. Nevertheless, he put all his accumulated strength into the blow and was even able to wound the monster. Moreover, the enemy lost both upper limbs, but was still able to throw the annoying people against the wall. In this situation, Lin He decided to send Ru Chen to help his brothers. He would fight the ghosts himself, and the youngest should aim for the monster's eyes. Then they would have a chance to win. Meanwhile, Jiang Wang and Yehu were coming to their senses, and the protagonist asked his friend to stop using this form, as his blood would soon boil and the guy would destroy himself from the inside. But the man didn't listen to him. It was more important for him to help his brothers until the very end, even if that end was near for him. The main character did not raise this topic again. He tried to figure out where the monster had gone, not noticing that it was attacking him from above. And again, the guy was lucky, as the second named brother noticed this and stopped the enemy, pushing his friend aside. And while he was holding back this creature, the man asked Jiang Wang to take advantage of the moment and kill the enemy. The protagonist didn't have to do it twice. He activated all his powers, skills, and techniques to cut the monster's tendons. This attack was incredible, that even the sword broke under its pressure. But the wounded creature continued to rage and injure the young people. At this moment, Ru Chen entered the battle and activated the first form of the Purple Qi of the East. Surprisingly, it was he who managed to knock the enemy to the ground and pin him with his sword. This was done especially for the older brothers. Now, they had to not hesitate and finish what he started. Yehu was the first to come to his senses and struck his opponent, not giving him the opportunity to harm his little brother. He grabbed the monster in a painful hold and asked Jiang Wang to take over. Even with the stump of his sword, the guy didn't keep himself waiting long and took aim for the final blow. And this time, he hit the enemy's most vulnerable spot. Jiang Wang didn't understand why. Even at such a moment, this creature became increasingly evil and powerful. Moreover, the problem was that Ru Chen could no longer hold the monster's leg, so the elder brother had to come up with something urgently. Since that was the case, Yehu decided to strangle the enemy a little. Lin He kept an eye on the brothers from time to time, but he had his own task and needed to help them too. But he was held back by weaker ghosts, though there were too many of them, and the boy began to understand that the eye in the chest was not the monster's weakness. At that moment, he realized that the weak spot was most likely in the monster's forehead. So while his brothers were holding the monster on a tripwire, he decided to attack the enemy. He put all his spiritual power into this blow and hit exactly the coin that was protecting something on the monster's forehead. This time they were right, and the monster began to die. But what the boys didn't know was that their performance had a witness hiding in the shadows. It seemed they had achieved a positive effect, but no one let the monster go, because they had no idea what else to expect from his body. Obviously, after the monster's weak point is destroyed, the yin energy will go out of control. But even after realizing this, the boys were unable to react in time, so the blast waves scattered them across the entire castle area. It's good that even after this, all the guys were alive and relatively healthy. Now it was possible to look around. The monster's body had disappeared, but when the smoke began to disappear, something was lying in the ditch. This was precisely the formation bead that needed to be destroyed. Meanwhile, Miao Yu was watching the fight through a magic mirror. She didn't recognize the fencing technique the boys were using. The girl wasn't particularly worried about the formation being destroyed, as they had foreseen different possible scenarios. But suddenly, the doors of the coffin opened, and an uninvited guest was about to come out into the clearing. The next undead looked very unpresentable, but she had no other servants that she didn't mind wasting. The girl's assistants stood in pentagrams and read spells to summon the undead, and apparently, they were doing it well. Everyone was eagerly awaiting the arrival of this creature, as the Elder had enormous power. This means he could take part in the ritual and help the spellcasters achieve what they wanted. But people had no idea that they had signed their own death warrant, and that it was they, their heads and blood, that would serve a great purpose. But Miao Yu knew perfectly well who she was dealing with, and thanked the Elder for his efforts. But not everything was done to complete the ritual, and the man, or the monster, it's hard to say, stabbed himself in the forehead with a dagger. Now everything was done as it should be, and from underground began to rise the demon that had been sealed there for many years. But the monster did not crawl out of the pit completely. It grabbed the Elder, and now it decided to hide. The girl looked at this without blinking an eye, as if everything was going according to plan, and nothing terrible or unusual had happened. Meanwhile, in the dark abyss, a green house floated, in which lived a creature that had just had a good meal. In the city of Shaolin, people gathered after completing the task. It was important for them to understand who had completed their part and who had not. Everyone was just waiting for the return of the main character and his friends. Then all the pieces of the puzzle would be with the general. Mr. Zhao did not expect a positive outcome, since in the group of newcomers, only one of them was able to open the meridians. There was no point in waiting any longer, so the general and his assistant decided to go to the boys' rescue. But there was no need to go anywhere, as the main character and his friends appeared through the smoke. This was good. Now all the parts of the formation were collected and arranged in the correct order. Now Chang Zheng could begin casting the spell to destroy all the puzzle pieces at once. After some time, all that remained of the beads was a reminder in the form of a wet spot on the tile. But after that, nothing really changed. But Commander Wei understood that it only seemed that way, and everyone needed to be ready to accept the fight. Unfortunately, he turned out to be right. And now the guys saw a huge mansion, which until that moment had been hidden by the formation, but now frightened them with its open doors. And while the newcomers didn't understand what was happening, the general declared full combat readiness and a code red alert. And a moment later, the night sky turned red. Ordinary people from other cities did not understand why the sky turned red and what they should all expect from this sign. But the cultivators knew perfectly well what the color red meant. So a logical question arose. Should they go to the aid of their allies or not? The boy's teacher also saw the message, but considered himself too old to take part in such raids. Meanwhile, the main character and the other young people stood in a circle of fire and watched as crowds of ghosts walked towards the house that had appeared. If, up until this point, people thought that there were many ghosts, now they realized that they were mistaken. There were too many of them. A whole sea of ghosts. They were a small island of hope in this mystical sea. It was clear to everyone that their strength was not enough to cut their way to the exit. It was even worse, because the legendary gate to the underworld had opened, and if that was the case, their chances were close to zero. And then a miracle happened. Jiang Wang could only stare in amazement at the bright golden light that dispelled the ghosts. The small island of safety also began to move under the influence of alien technology. Apparently, a powerful cultivator came to their aid. Not everyone could use the astral body, but this man could, which means he entered the kingdom of heaven and earth. But Yehu, like his brothers, did not recognize the man who essentially saved them behind the smoke. It was Lord Wei and his assistant who were not particularly happy about having to intervene in the current situation. It's a good thing that at least the gate to the underworld was phantom, otherwise there would have been even more problems. The general bowed his head to the Lord and reported that as soon as they broke the formation seal, a gate appeared in front of them. The old man did not like either the politeness or the report itself, so he hit the man and verbally insulted him. He believed that all the people gathered here were extremely useless and that they couldn't even deal with the ghosts and created problems, although they should have solved them. This behavior deeply hurt Yehu, so he tried to tell the old man everything because they had risked their lives and did not deserve a stream of insults. But Jiang Wan stopped him. The general didn't object. He understood that, by and large, he had failed his mission, and was therefore prepared to receive the punishment he deserved. The Lord didn't take long to consider the punishment, as he still had matters to resolve with the Water Clan. So the general was immediately demoted and fined a hefty sum. After this, the Lord disappeared, and although Mr. Wei was not happy, he humbly accepted the punishment. Evening came. The soldiers were waiting for orders from their leaders. Why the mermaids decided to put a spoke in people's wheels was still unclear, but the secret was about to become clear soon. Guests had gathered at the residence of the water chief, and the wine was quite good, as for a gift from a person. However, this did not make an impression on the guest. He tried to turn the Water Lord against the land clans. It was naive and ridiculous because, although Lord Song was young, he was not stupid enough to not notice such an obvious provocation, and besides, he had fulfilled his part of the obligations, so there should be no questions for him. The skeleton had a different opinion. He expected long-term support, but did not receive it, and his clan lost many members, which should not have happened if the young lord had done everything as they had agreed earlier. But he shouldn't have said that, just like he shouldn't have brought up the topic of Lord Song's father. He didn't like that business, so he resorted to threats, saying that an army of enemies was already approaching. The skeleton could do whatever he wanted, but it would be better for him not to be so greedy and to leave peacefully. But the skeleton was in no hurry to leave, saying that he would give the Lord the Dragon Pearl if he would act on his side. The gift was tempting, but was it worth the effort? That was the question. If so, the skeleton had nothing more to do here, and he decided to leave. Mr. Song was left alone. He was unpleasant to this skeleton, as were his speeches, especially about honor. It sounded extremely funny. But what was not funny at all was that one of the lords of the earthly clans was ready to marry his heir to his sister, which the young ruler would not have wanted at all. However, it was possible to gain some time, and Mr. Song was going to send his shy sister to the people to study at the academy. And although he understood that the clans were preparing a big mess, the training place chosen for the girl was the safest.